Section 1 of How a British Subject Became President of the United States. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kevin Davidson. How a British Subject Became President of the United States by Arthur P. Hinman. To the Citizens of the United States. The Constitution of the United States requires that both the President and the Vice President should be native born. Article 2 reads, "No person except a natural born citizen... shall be eligible to the office of President." And Article 12 of the amendments reads, "But no person constitutionally ineligible to the office of President shall be eligible to that of Vice President of the United States." It is a matter of much interest to know whether our present President was eligible to the Vice Presidency. Chester A. Arthur, when nominated as a candidate for the Vice Presidency, was, at first, unable to name his birthplace. The party managers insisted that he should name a spot before he wrote his letter of acceptance. At that time, he gave out to the press of the country that he was going on a fishing excursion with his friend Robert G. Dunn of the Mercantile Agency, in order that he might have time to prepare his acceptance. In point of fact, he started with Mr. Dunn for Montreal, in the province of Quebec, Canada, and made a search of the records there to see if anything existed showing that he was born in Canada. Not finding any there, it occurred to him that he would be safe in naming some out-of-the-way place in the United States, and consequently he chose a place where a deceased brother was born, and thus made it appear that he was native-born. Therefore, it will be still more interesting and entertaining to trace the genealogy of the man who did not want to recall it for himself. A citizen of New York State has ascertained all of the facts, and here relates them. Almost a century ago there lived in Ballymena County, Antrim, Ireland, a Scotchman named Gavin MacArthur. He had a wife and several children, and had emigrated from Scotland on account of a family difficulty arising from his having embraced the Protestant religion, while his friends and relatives were of the Roman Catholic faith. Shortly after his arrival in Ireland, his religious zeal caused him to change his family name from MacArthur to Arthur. It is understood that he made this change to distinguish his branch of the family from that of the Roman Catholic branch. In the year 1796 a son was born to this Gavin Arthur, and he was named William Arthur, in honor of William of Orange. This boy was educated at what was then known as the Blue School in Belfast. He simply acquired a common school education. On leaving school in the year 1818, he emigrated in a sailing vessel from Derry, Ireland, to Three Rivers in Canada. It may here be remarked that, like a great many of the young men of his age, he was very fond of the three great evils of this life, that is, R.W.T. Billy Arthur, as he was familiarly called by his associates in Canada, came direct from Three Rivers to a place called Upper Mills, now known as Stanbridge, Canada, looking for employment as a teacher. He offered to give lessons in writing, being a fine penman at a very small salary. He was engaged for one term in the year 1819. Two of his scholars at that time, Erastus Chandler and Luther Burleigh, are still living. On leaving Stanbridge, he obtained a government school at Dunham Flats, Canada, a place about 7 miles east of Stanbridge. Here he remained for several years, and one of his scholars, Joseph Baker, is still living there. He says that he remembers William Arthur very well, and that he attended his school from about 1819 to 1821. He remembers his marriage to the daughter of George Washington Stone, a Methodist priest at Dunham, and that they ran across the line to East Berkshire, Vermont, to get married. When they returned to Dunham, they lived in the upper part of a house owned by one of Baker's relatives. Mr. Baker claims to have been the favorite pupil of his teacher, and when his first child, Regina Melvina Maria Arthur, was born, he took Baker to see the baby. It was a girl, and in honor of the event Mr. Arthur treated Baker to a glass of whiskey. Baker further stated that William Arthur, after his marriage in the state of Vermont and return, was remarried at the Episcopal Church at Dunham, Canada, by the then pastor, the Reverend Mr. Cotton. This remarriage was performed to satisfy certain members of his wife's family, who were a little inclined to doubt everything which they did not see and in which they did not participate. This runaway marriage is corroborated by Leonard D. Geer, Erastus Chandler, and others. Baker said that Arthur was lame, or club-footed, and liked his whiskey. While at Dunham he acted for at least 2 years as clerk to Priest Cotton. Arthur once went to the States to attend a religious meeting on a lake, supposed to be Burlington, Lake Champlain, and was converted. He learned that he afterwards became a Baptist preacher in the States. He also says that Arthur stated to him that the way his feet were lamed was that something fell on them when he was a child and crushed them. This account was somewhat modified after his conversion, and he stated the true facts to Reverend Alva Sabin. During the fall of the year 1823, William Arthur, with his family, emigrated to Burlington, Vermont, and obtained employment as a copyist in a lawyer's office. While so engaged, he went one Sunday for amusement to see some Baptists break a hole in the ice in Lake Champlain and take a swim. The ceremony so impressed him that he made up his mind that he would become a Baptist. At Burlington, March 14, 1824, his daughter Jane, afterwards Mrs. Marston, of Cohoes, New York, was born. While he continued living in Burlington, a Mrs. Stevens, who had been a playmate and companion of Mrs. Arthur when at school, visited her and remained for 2 or 3 weeks. Mrs. Stevens is still living and is about 80 years old. She resides with her son Levi Stevens at Dunham Flats, Canada, the childhood home of Mrs. Arthur. She detailed many facts in relation to Mrs. Arthur and her life at Burlington, and says she had 2 beautiful little girls. She then spoke of what kind neighbors she had and how they treated her in sickness. Mrs. Stevens remembered that on one occasion Mrs. Arthur exclaimed to her, "Who are my neighbors? They are a low, ignorant set." During the fall of the year 1825, William Arthur moved to Jericho, Vermont, and on January 22, 1826, another daughter, named Almeda, was born. In the spring of 1826 he moved to Richford, Vermont, just on the Canada line. In 1827 he moved to Waterville, Vermont, and from Waterville he moved to North Fairfield, Vermont, in May 1828. Mrs. Stevens states, from the time William Arthur moved to Richford, Vermont, until he was settled in North Fairfield, in the new house built for him there, Mrs. Arthur visited at her parents' house frequently with her children, and she well remembers her eldest boy, William, being born there in March, 1828. The exact date of the month was either the 16th or 18th of March, from the fact that his grandfather said that if he had been born on the 17th, he would have insisted on calling him St. Patrick, as he was a half-Irish baby, and that it was lucky for this boy that he came either a day too soon or a day too late. Mrs. Stevens helped make his first clothes. She was a near neighbor and visited the Arthurs almost every day. When Mrs. Arthur was in Dunham, she also remembers that when William Arthur first came to see the baby, he tried to plague Mrs. Arthur in her presence by saying that he wanted to have the baby named Tommy Wood, after an old beau of Mrs. Arthur, and that she drove him out of the room laughing, for he was an awful man for saying things he didn't mean, always joking. She says that Mrs. Arthur and herself finally named him William Chester Allen Arthur, and that many times she held him in her arms. He was the perfect picture of his father. Mr. L.I.H. Corley and Mrs. Captain John Chandler also remember the birth of this boy at Dunham. They both now reside at Stanbridge. In the month of October, 1830, William Arthur again obtained employment as teacher at Stanbridge, Canada. Many of his scholars are still living. Their statements are hereinafter detailed. They remember his return. Mrs. Arthur remained in North Fairfield until the following spring, when she went on a visit to Burlington. She closed up her house and went to her father's house at Dunham, and only occasionally returned to live in North Fairfield, on account of the absence of her husband. While living in North Fairfield, Vermont, on November 1830, another boy was born, who was named Chester Abel Arthur, in honor of Dr. Chester Abel, a boon companion of William Arthur, who attended Mrs. Arthur in her confinement. Several persons are now living who were aware of the birth of this boy, and there are one or two more who think that they recollect it. They are probably mistaken, as this boy died at Burlington while Mrs. Arthur was on a visit there. A few months thereafter Mrs. Arthur sought her parents' home for comfort, and left her home in Fairfield for a time. Ezra Wright Sherman, who now lives at Montgomery Center, Franklin County, Vermont, remembers the birth of this child at Fairfield. He had attended school under Reverend William Arthur when he first came to Fairfield, and just after the birth of this child went with Mr. Arthur to Dunham, Canada, to get a school for himself. He was, however, too late. He remembers that besides the baby there were 2 girls and 1 boy at home with Mrs. Arthur. He knew the Abel brothers, Luther, Chester, and Calvin, and that the boy born in Fairfield was named after Chester. Luther Abel was his chum at school, and was a very witty boy. Dr. C. L. Case, now of Rutland, Vermont, claims that he knew of the birth of this child. Mr. Sherman says that his memory must have been extraordinary, for Dr. Case's mother was at this time a girl about 17 years old, and had been attending school with him, and that she and her mother were at the house when the child was born. William Arthur, having been re-engaged as schoolteacher at Stanbridge, Canada, in the fall of 1830, continued to preach at Fairfield every other Sunday. Finally, in April 1832, he prevailed upon his friend, Dr. Chester Abel, to take charge of his school at Stanbridge, Canada, for the balance of the term. Then, with his wife, who was still stopping at her father's house in Canada, he went to live at a place called Williston, Chittenden County, Vermont. He had moved his household effects 3 months before. While Mr. Arthur was still teaching school in Canada, his wife, in the summer of 1831, went to visit some friends near Burlington, Vermont, and while there her baby boy, Chester Abel, sickened and died. This sad blow caused her to return to Canada, to her father's house. Mr. Arthur, on mentioning the fact to Uncle Jack Baker and others at Stanbridge, said that he was so poor at the time that he did not have money enough to bury the child. Mrs. Arthur resided with all her children except the oldest girl, Regina, who was at school with her father at Stanbridge until leaving for Williston, Vermont. Here at Williston, Mr. Arthur preached for a small Baptist church just organized, and also set up a private academy in a building owned by the Reverend Peter Chase. Then for the first time Mr. Arthur began to see better days, and to live more comfortably, and to surround himself with many cultivated and influential friends, among whom were ex-Governor Martin Chittenden, son of old Governor Thomas Chittenden, the first governor of the state of Vermont. It was at Williston in 1832 that a baby girl, who was also named Malvina, was born. Dr. Chester Abel died this year, and was buried at Fairfield. In January 1833, William Arthur commenced to preach in the village of Hinesboro, west of the town of Williston. in the same county and state, and finally in the summer or fall of 1833 moved his family there, although he continued his academy or school at Williston. An old lady, Mrs. Milton Bostwick, who still lives there, also taught school under Elder Arthur, as he was then called, at the Williston Academy in the spring and summer of 1834. While living at Hinesboro in 1834, William Arthur, Jr., was born. The name William was dropped from the name of the firstborn son, William Chester Allen Arthur, late of Dunham Flats, Canada, and the little Englishman and senior son was thereafter known as Chester Allen Arthur. Early in the fall of 1834, elder William Arthur moved from Hinesboro. At that time he had living 5 girls and 2 boys. The daughters of the Reverend Alva Sabin remembered trundling the oldest boy, Chet, on the sidewalk of the streets of Williston in 1833 in a handcart. The boy was then about 5 years old. While at Hinesboro, William Arthur also preached at Essex, Vermont, and when he left Hinesboro he removed his family to York, Livingston County, New York, and went there to preach. After preaching a while, he removed to Perry, Wyoming County, and preached there. Then he went to Greenwich, Washington County, in the same state, and afterwards moved to Schenectady, New York, where both he and his son entered Union College. And the record shows that on September 5th, 1845, Chester Allen Arthur, formerly William Chester Allen Arthur, matriculated with Union College and entered the sophomore class, stating his age then to be 16 years. He graduated in July, 1848. Elder William Arthur received a degree of A.M. from Union College. Reverend William Arthur preached from 1855 to 1863 as pastor of Calvary Baptist Church in Little State Street in the city of Albany, New York, and finally finished his career as a divine by preaching in the Newtonville Baptist Church near Albany until his death on October 28, 1875. Chester Allen Arthur, on leaving Union College, studied law, and was admitted to the bar in New York City on the 15th of May, 1854. His ability as a lawyer is unquestioned, for it has been written by his friends that old members of the bar, like E.D. Culver, would retire from a case to let him try it, or, like William M. Evarts, beg to be allowed to be an associate counsel in the case, and that he, Arthur, would win the cases even though Charles O'Connor were the opposing counsel. It is claimed, and believed to be true, that he took a very active part in politics from an early age, but did not cast his first ballot for president until November, 1852. He could have done so, it is claimed, only he was not quite old enough and did not know how to vote without getting out his last papers, and the 1868 papers were not known in those days. He contributed greatly to the re-election of Edwin D. Morgan as governor of New York, and on January 1, 1861, was made engineer-in-chief for his political services. In the commencement of the late war, Governor Morgan, on whose staff he still held the position of chief engineer, made him inspector general and quartermaster general, and ordered him to put on gory epaulets and open a quartermaster's department in New York City at once, which order he very promptly obeyed, and so skillfully did he run his department, and so well did he understand politics in running the same, that the government always approved his accounts at once, while in other states their accounts were cut down from $1 to $10 millions each. It is well here to say that he did not practice law at this time, but although a double general, he never knew the smell of gunpowder, nor ever heard the whistle of the enemy's bullet in anger during the cruel war. But he did find it to be a fact, and so reported it to the government, that blue caps for the U.S. soldier made by his friend Colonel Thomas Murphy would never fade nor lose their color. The well-known desire of General Arthur to show his fighting qualities in the field led his friends to elect him colonel of the 9th Regiment, New York Volunteers, but he declined the honor. He was offered the command of the Metropolitan Brigade, and again he declined, because, as we have it, he could make more money at home. And although he lost his commission as general on the 1st of January, 1863, his inclination to keep out of the army continued unabated. At the close of the war he took a leading part in politics, and so expert was he in the art that he managed to elect himself president of the Central Grant Club of New York City. By reason of the prestige which the position gave him, he was enabled to maneuver some very fine deals with the opposite political party. In fact, his political astuteness so attracted the attention of the honorable Democratic statesman William M. Tweed, or Boss Bill Tweed, as he was called in those days of ring rule, that he caused an office to be created by an act of the legislature of New York for this honorable member of the Republican party. The Board of Supervisors, of which William M. Tweed was a prominent member, passed a resolution fixing the salary of this office at $10,000 a year. The duties of the office, if any, should have been performed by the corporation attorney, but Bill Tweed and Chet Arthur, in their political astuteness, thought otherwise. It is claimed that he held the position only 3 years, and resigned only upon an attempt of the Democratic Tammany Ring to coerce Republicans employed in the city departments to aid them in concealing the robberies of the ring, not, as some surmised, that holding office as a collector of the port of New York under Republican administration, some people might think it strange that he still held office under Bill Tweed and the Democratic administration in New York City. The office created was that of counsel to the commissioners of the Board of Taxes and Assessments, and the following statement shows that it was accomplished. The legislature had passed an act prohibiting the common council of the city of New York from creating new offices or increasing the salary of any person holding office under the present city charter. Tweed was boss and supervisor. John T. Hoffman had been elected governor in November 1868. A. Oakley Hall was mayor. Richard B. Connolly was comptroller. Bernard Smythe was receiver of taxes. Richard O'Gorman was counsel of the corporation with 3 assistants. Thomas C. Field was corporation attorney. John Morrissey represented the city in Congress, and Michael Connolly was register. Tweed wanted an office for his friend Chet Arthur, and demanded of Senator Thomas Creamer that an office be created, and it was done. The act is found in the Session Laws of New York for 1869, Volume 2, pages 2264 and 2265, Chapter 898, passed May 17, 1869, and is entitled An Act in Relation to Taxes, etc. At the end of Section 2, as a rider thereto, are these words: "And for the more effectual discharge of their duties, the said commissioners are hereby authorized to employ counsel at an annual salary to be fixed by the Board of Supervisors of said county." The Board of Supervisors at that time were Walter Roach, Esquire, President; Henry Smith, William M. Tweed, Andreas Willman, John Fox, James Hayes, Andrew Bleakley, Isaac J. Oliver, Gerson M. Herman, Orison Blunt, John Bryce. In the city library at the City Hall, in the city of New York, will be found a book numbered in said library 2846, endorsed Proceedings of the Board of Supervisors, 1869, Volume 2. On page 71 will be found the following: Communication. The following was received: Office of the Commissioners of Taxes and Assessments, No. 32 Chambers Street, New York, July 5, 1869. To the Honorable Board of Supervisors, Gentlemen: I am instructed by the Commissioners of Taxes and Assessments to inform your Board that, pursuant to the provisions of Chapter 898 of the laws of 1879, Chester A. Arthur, Esquire, was appointed counsel to this Board on the 5th instant. Respectfully, Your obedient servant, E. F. Babcock, Secretary. On page 72 of the same book we find, whereupon the following was presented, resolved that the salary of the counsel to the Board of Commissioners of Taxes and Assessments be and is hereby fixed at $10,000 per annum, to take effect from date of this appointment, which was adopted by the following vote: affirmative, Supervisors Bleakley, Blunt, Bryce, Fox, Hayes, Herman, the President, and Supervisor Smith, 8. And the same was directed to be sent to the Mayor for approval. The Commissioners of Taxes and Assessments were Nathaniel Sands, William H. King, and George H. Andrews. Thomas Murphy, the cap contractor during the late war, and afterwards collector of the port of New York, resigned that position on November 20th, 1871, and was succeeded in the office by General Chester A. Arthur. We find in a Republican weekly paper called Harper's Weekly, of date December 16th, 1871, mention of the event as follows: General Chester A. Arthur, whose gory epaulets were worn as a member of Governor Morgan's staff, comes again to the front as collector of the port of New York. He is the son of a clergyman, the Reverend William Arthur of Newtonville. Clergymen's sons are proverbial for being good men, caring more for piety than politics or pelf, and opposed to all prescriptions for opinion's sake. His predecessor, Mr. Murphy, was conspicuous for this latter virtue, and it is confidently asserted that General Arthur will not emulate him therein, but elevate the standard of custom house virtue to the fine pinnacle it obtained under the administration of George Washington. It appears that he entered the office of collector a poor man, and managed the affairs of the office so well, with the aid of General George A. Sharp, Alonzo B. Cornell, and others, that he found time to send a revenue cutter loaded with custom house employees from all parts of the city of New York to one Republican district primary in said city, called Harlem. These employees, being armed with tissue ballots and using the names of Republicans living in that district, voted from 10 to 30 ballots each at a time, and thus were able to carry the district primary against the will of the majority in the Republican Association in that district. And in the same district, the old 21st Assembly District, he demanded and caused the Republican candidate to withdraw, on the threat that if he did not, he, Arthur, would slaughter his boy, and slaughter his friends holding office in the custom house, meaning the candidate William Hawes' son and friends. Afterwards he put an independent Republican, so called, without nomination in the field, and one whom the Republicans could not and did not support at the polls. Finally, for doing his duty, he was retired from the custom house of the port of New York. This was done after a due examination of the manner of his work by a commission, and on the approval of the work of the commission by the President of the United States. He retired with the snug little sum to his credit of about $3 millions, and all saved out of his salary as collector of the port of New York. End of section 1. Recording by Kevin Davidson. www.blogordie.com. Section 2. Of How a British Subject Became President of the United States, by Arthur P. Hinman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kevin Davidson. A copy of the testimony offered, or a portion of it taken before commissioners, as to the elevated standard to which he raised the custom house virtue while collector of the port, will be worth reading. It was published in The Reporter and Harlem Local, New York, May 26, 1877, entitled Custom House Investigations. On Monday last, the 21st instant, a delegation of Republican citizens from the 21st Assembly District called upon the Customs Investigating Commission at the Custom House and offered some interesting evidence. The first witness examined was Mr. John E. Hegarty, who resides at 1654 Second Avenue, New York City, who testified as follows: that he was elected member of the 21st Assembly Association in 1871, and was appointed in the appraisers department as opener and packer at $3 per day on the 12th of December, 1872, and discharged therefrom on the 18th of July, 1875. He demanded the cause of his removal, and was told by the superintendent, Mr. Lawrence Harney, that Mr. A. P. Ketchum had asked Mr. Darling several times to discharge all of William Haw, Jr.'s friends in his department, but he would not discharge him at his request then. Collector Arthur asked for our removal also, and finally Surveyor Sharp demanded his discharge, and Mr. Harney told me I was discharged because I would not support the Custom House party in the district against William Haw, Jr., ex-president of the Republican Association, through which he was appointed, showing letters as to competency from his superior officers in the Custom House, having served 4 years in the United States Army during the late rebellion, and had an honorable discharge therefrom. The next witness was James O. Roper, who resides at 155 East 112th Street, by occupation advertising agent, office 140, Fulton Street, New York. He testified that in 1875 he resided in the 21st Assembly District, New York, and had been for several years a member of the Republican Association in that district, and had been inspector of elections at their primaries, and was acquainted with Stephen S. Doty, a Custom House inspector, also a member of the association. In 1875, just before the election of delegates to the Saratoga Convention, Doty offered to procure him a place in the Custom House if he would use his influence to make Henry Welch chairman of the Board of Inspectors. He doubted Doty's power to procure him the place, and William Starrett, also a Custom House inspector and member of the association, made him the same promise, and sent him a letter to meet him at the office of Surveyor George H. Sharp. He called on Sharp accordingly. Sharp told him that the collector would attend to the matter of his appointment at once. Also went to see Colonel A. P. Ketchum, general appraiser of Custom House, and also member of the association, who gave him a letter directed to the collector of the port, Chester A. Arthur, Esquire. Roper did not read the letter, but Mr. Ketchum said it was in regard to his appointment. He delivered the letter to Mr. Phillips, the collector's secretary. Ketchum had before written him that his appointment would be handed him in a day or two. Afterwards he refused to make Mr. Ketchum's nominee chairman of the Board of Inspectors, and the place in the Custom House was never given him. He was told when they wanted him they would notify him. The next patriot was Payson Dwight, residing at 114 East 112th Street, New York City. He was appointed Inspector of Customs by Thomas Murphy, collector of the Port of New York, upon the recommendation of Messrs. Edwards Pierpont, Francis E. Spinner, and Judge Noah Davis, on December 24, 1870, and remained in the government service until October 28, 1875. During that time he has acted as boarding, discharging, debenture, and district officer of the port. During the time he acted as assistant boarding officer, Surveyor Sharp telegraphed to the barge officer to hold the steamship Manhattan, a revenue cutter, subject to his order. This was about September or October 1874. He, Sharp, together with the collector of the port, General Arthur, boarded the revenue cutter and proceeded to quarantine, and boarded the steamship Russia after sunset, and proceeded to saloon of said steamship to receive Mrs. Secretary Belknap and Mrs. Marsh, who were on board, and had with them personal baggage. Mrs. Belknap's packages, numbering about 43, consisted of trunks and parcels. These were taken from the steamship Russia in the stream by order of Surveyor Sharp, without examination, except 13 that were in the hold of the vessel. Afterwards Sharp wrote me the order for the 13 to be delivered to Mr. Bliss, and for him to forward the same to the Fifth Avenue Hotel. Other evidence of a like tenure was rejected as being too remote altogether. The officials were then and are still federal office holders. Mr. Dwight gave some very interesting evidence as to irregularities and the mode by which certain abuses might be corrected to some length. The spokesman, Mr. A. P. Hinman, then informed the commission that several others would probably testify this week, and was answered that the commission would gladly hear all that he might induce to come and testify. William Haw, Jr., still a Republican in principle, residing at 246 East 117th Street, New York City, testified to the following facts. In the fall of 1866 he became a member of the 21st Assembly District Republican Association, and had previously been a member of other Republican associations in the city since 1856. He had been in consultation in the past with the various leaders of the party to secure the triumph of its cause. He was appointed an Inspector of Customs September 13, 1861, by Collector Hiram Barney, and resigned December 6, 1864, to take the public store carting of the Custom House under Collector Simeon Draper, and held that office until July 1, 1866. He was then removed by Collector Henry A. Smythe for the reason that he opposed the policy of Andrew Johnson's administration, and he was not connected with the Custom House thereafter. He was appointed Inspector of Stations in the New York Post Office on October 13, 1873, by Thomas L. James, Postmaster, and was removed November 10, 1874, for the reason, as stated by the Postmaster, that he did not obey the orders of General Arthur in relation to the political affairs in his 21st Assembly District. Mr. Haw here produced a personal letter from Horace Greeley. When questioned further on his removal, Mr. Haw testified that the day after he received notice of his removal he called upon Postmaster James to learn the cause of his removal, and was informed that Collector Arthur had demanded it. Among all the Republicans in this district, great excitement had been caused about this time by the action and interference of Collector Arthur and Surveyor Sharp with the politics of the district by intimidating office holders. It was insisted that they should vote and act as directed by the collector and surveyor. All those who attempted to assert their manhood by doing otherwise at the primaries were removed from office. Mr. Haw said that a few weeks before his removal in 1874, at the primary election held in his district, when delegates were chosen to the Assembly Convention, he was a candidate before that convention. This was composed of 42 citizens, not one of them an office holder, and he was their unanimous choice. He was driven out of the field finally in this way. An independent candidate was put in the field by the State Committee, located at the Fifth Avenue Hotel, presided over by Surveyor George H. Sharp. He was requested to withdraw. He refused, and then General Arthur sent for him and ordered him to withdraw. He still refused. Then Collector Arthur threatened in these words, that if he did not withdraw he would slaughter him, and that he would slaughter his friends, and he would slaughter his boy. Most of his friends were in the Custom House. He defied him. Then the threatened slaughter commenced, and his boy was removed from the Custom House. Here is a list. John E. Haggerty, from the Appraisers' Depot. Archimedes Bell, from the Appraisers' Depot. Benjamin Page, from Internal Revenue Depot. John L. Kingsland, from Watchman at Stores. Payson Dwight, from Inspector of Customs. Samuel Wallace, from Inspector of Customs. William F. Harridan, from Inspector of Customs. Joseph M. McDonald, from Weighmaster's Depot. Charles A. Du Moulin, from Weighmaster's Depot. Nelson Mott, from Clerk in Surveyor's Office, and many others. To save others from the slaughter, he withdrew from the race. Because their candidate was defeated at the polls on election day, he was removed from the post office. He had been ordered to elect the candidate. He couldn't, for the Republicans refused to support him on election day. At the primary election held the next year in his district on September 3, 1875, for delegates to the Saratoga Convention, the Custom House authorities, Arthur, Sharp, and Bliss, desired to run a ticket against the Republicans in the 21st District, and Collector Arthur gave orders that all the federal office holders in the whole city were to come into the district on the night of the primary and beat the ticket put up by the Republicans in that district. The orders were obeyed. Some came by way of tugboats, some by railroad cars, and some by way of steamboats. They voted on members' names belonging to the Republican Association in the district. He detected a great many and stopped them from voting. While he was so engaged, one General A.P. Ketchum, then United States Appraiser, who now holds that office, was encouraging these repeaters to vote. When he found Mr. Haw preventing them from doing so, he called on the police and had him arrested for interfering with the voting. He was discharged after being detained about half an hour at the station house, as Ketchum did not dare to make a charge against him, and could not find anyone to do it for him. He returned and continued to do his duty at the primary. While he was away they had done their work, and the people were beaten. At the primary election for delegates to the state convention held March 17, 1876, everybody who wished to vote, whether he was a member of the association or not, was allowed to do so. Men who were not known in the district deposited a number of ballots at a time of the color and size. Mr. Haw produced a very thin ticket about half an inch wide and 2 inches long on very fine tissue paper of a pink color, here shown. When one of these men voted, he would roll up 20 or 25 of these tissue ballots and deposit them as one ballot. When the inspectors counted the ballots, they did it by simply counting the association ticket, and lumped all the other tickets as being in the majority, and the Republicans were thus voted down. Of the 3 inspectors, he knew that 2 were Custom House officials, and the other had been a plumber under the Democratic boss, William Tweed. Neither Mr. Haw nor anyone else was allowed to challenge votes at this primary. He further stated that General A.P. Ketchum, before he went into the United States Appraiser's Department, was Collector of Internal Revenue. One Captain Benjamin Page held, under him, the position of Assistant Collector of Internal Revenue, until removed as one of Haw's friends. He now has his office at number 2298 3rd Avenue, New York City. He informed Mr. Haw that while he was connected with said Internal Revenue Office, a colored man named Robert Jones was on the payroll at a salary of $1,500, while in fact he was manservant for said Ketchum and did no work for the office of any kind. On his forcible retirement from the Custom House, General Arthur immediately passed into obscurity. Here he remained until at the last National Republican Convention at Chicago in 1880, when the senior senator of New York, in order to handicap the man who had succeeded in obtaining the presidential nomination, suggested the name of Chester A. Arthur, a New York local politician, for the position of vice president. The senator himself well knew that his availability as a candidate would impede rather than help the head of the ticket, and that the presidential candidate would be compelled to call upon the senior senator to aid and assist him to even carry the state of New York. The political astuteness of the senior senator was thereafter fully developed, and the terms of success imposed. The foregoing pages comprise a statement of facts which can be fully verified and are in the possession of the author. The following pages contain a portion of the affidavits, narratives, and letters of divers persons in relation to the birthplace of our now acting president. The author has thought best to give them in full as they were collected, and from them the reader can draw his own conclusions. Realizing that he is only one of the millions of voters of his native country, but believing that the Constitution should be rigidly regarded, and that the nativity of all candidates for the offices of President and Vice President should be certainly settled and determined before presenting them to the people for their suffrages, he respectfully asks for his book a thoughtful consideration. End of section 2. Recording by Kevin Davidson, www.blogordie.com. Section 3 of How a British Subject Became President of the United States, by Arthur P. Hinman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kevin Davidson. Erastus Chandler of Stanbridge East, formerly Upper Mills, Canada, remembers William Arthur when he first came to Stanbridge, went to school to him. He was a lame Irishman and inclined to drink, but was a splendid penman. He landed in this country at Three Rivers, and his first school was at Stanbridge. I think it was about 1819. I was about 15 years of age the first time he was here, and about 25 years of age the second time. I know he married George Washington Stone's daughter, Methodist priest. Do not have any knowledge of their children. I remember 2 years he lived at Dunham. I know that he came direct here after he landed in this country from Three Rivers. I have heard him say so. Joseph Baker of Dunham Flats, P.Q., remembers going to school to William Arthur about 1819 and 1821, remembers his marriage, and went across the line to get married, run away, and when they returned lived in the upper part of a house belonging to his, Baker's, relatives. He was the favored pupil of his teacher, and when the first child was born, the teacher, William Arthur, took him to see the baby. It was a girl, and was called Regina. He was treated at the time by the teacher to a glass of whiskey in honor of the baby. William Arthur lived some years at Dunham Flats, but don't know where he moved after that. His teacher, William Arthur, was lame. While at Dunham, he went to a camp meeting on some lake and got converted, and afterward heard he became a Baptist priest in the States. The way his feet were lamed was, as William Arthur stated to him, that something fell on his feet when a child and crushed them. St. Armand Station, Province of Quebec, Canada, December 21, 1880. Mr. A. P. Hinman. Dear Sir, I received a letter from you the 18th instant, asking me if one of my teachers in Stanbridge was named William Arthur. I answer, yes. The first time he kept our school was between 1816 and 1820. He was not married at that time. He left and was away between 10 and 12 years, then returned and kept our school, I think 1 year. It is so long ago that I cannot say positively. He was married the last time that he kept our school, but did not bring his family there. He was a Baptist minister and used to preach occasionally. If what I have written is not satisfactory, you had better write to Erastus Chandler of Stanbridge East Village, Province of Quebec, Canada. He is older than I, and probably can give you more information than I can. Yours respectfully, Luther Burley. Protonotary's Office, Sweetsburg, 7th January, 1881. A. P. Hinman, Esquire, New York. Sir, I have just completed an exhaustive search in the archives of our office from 1819 to 1835 inclusive, and I have found only one entry in the register of the civil status for the year 1822. It is very possible that the different ministers of Dunham Flats, Sutton, and Stanbridge have neglected during these years to deposit the duplicates of their registers. I think your proper course now would be to inquire of the present incumbents of the places above mentioned. They must have the duplicates. I enclose a certificate of birth and baptism of Regina Malvina, one of Arthur's daughters, and also $1.10. The searches have cost $1.70, and the certificates 40 cents, and you paid me $3.20. Hoping you will be more successful in other quarters, I am, sir, yours truly, C. Boucher, Department P.S.C. Stanbridge, East Quebec, Canada, January 1st, 1881. Arthur P. Hinman, Esquire. Dear Sir, your letter to the rector of the Baptist Church in Stanbridge Ridge was handed to me by the postmaster, because at present I am preaching in the vacant house previously occupied by the church in question. In reply to your inquiry, I may say that previous to 1840 all duplicates of registers of baptisms, marriages, and burials performed in the then district of Montreal were deposited with the prothonotary of the district of Montreal in Montreal. But on the division of the district and the erection of the district of Bedford, I am informed all such records of acts performed within the district of Bedford were sent to the prothonotary of the district at Sweetsburg, where they can be examined and copies obtained for 25 cents each, if I am correctly informed. I have heard it said by the older people that previous to Mr. Arthur taking orders as a Baptist elder, he held an official position in the Episcopal Church in Dunham, where he lived for some time, and if any of his children were born and baptized in Canada, it must have been before he became a Baptist elder, as Baptists do not baptize their children. The records of such act will be found in the original register with the rector at Dunham, unless destroyed at the burning of the rectory some years ago, and if so, they can be found in duplicate at the prothenotary's office at Sweetsburg. Hoping that this may fully answer your inquiry, with compliments of the season, I am, sir, yours faithfully, Samuel Jackson, Minister, Methodist Church, Canada. State of New York, City and County of New York. George Fourneret, being duly sworn, says that he resides at Dunham, in the province of Quebec, that he is rector of All Saints' Church, Dunham, province of Quebec, and he has examined the parochial register of marriages and baptisms kept at said church, that he finds there recorded on the 12th day of April, 1821, the marriage of William Arthur and Malvina Stone, and on the 31st day of March, 1822, the baptism of Regina Malvina, daughter of William and Malvina Arthur of Dunham, born the 8th instant, that the annexed exhibits marked A and B are true copies of the entries in said parish register. And deponent further says that he verily believes that the parish register examined by him is the parish register kept at the dates above mentioned, and that the entries of which the annexed are copies are original entries in said register. George Fourneret, sworn to before me this 14th day of January, 1881, P. F. Spencer, Notary Public, Kings County, New York. Certificate filed, New York County. A. On this 12th of April, 1821, William Arthur, of full age, schoolmaster, and Malvina Stone, under age, spinster, both of Dunham, were married after publication of banns, with consent of parents, in presence of the following persons by me, signed, Charles C. Cotton, Minister, William Arthur, Malvina Stone, Almeda Stone, Alexander Brown. True copy of an entry in the parish register of All Saints' Church, Dunham, province of Quebec. George Fourneret, Rector. Durham, province of Quebec, this 28th day of December, 1880. B. On this 31st of March, 1822, Regina Malvina, daughter of William and Malvina Arthur, of Dunham, schoolmaster, born the 8th instant, was baptized this day in presence of the following persons by me, signed, Charles C. Cotton, Minister, William Arthur, Malvina Arthur, James Stone. True copy of an entry in the parish register of All Saints' Church, Dunham, province of Quebec. George Fourneret, Rector. Dunham, province of Quebec, this 28th day of December, 1880. Province of Quebec, District of Bedford. Extract from the register of the acts of baptism, marriage, and burials of the Episcopal Congregation of the Church of England at Dunham, for the year 1822. On this 31st of March, 1822, Regina Malvina, daughter of William and Malvina Arthur, of Dunham, schoolmaster, born the 8th instant, was baptized this day in presence of the following persons by me, signed, Charles C. Cotton, Minister, William Arthur, Malvina Arthur, James Stone, David Brown. I, the undersigned Deputy Prothonotary of the Superior Court, in and for the said District of Bedford, do hereby certify that the following is true. Extracts from the Register of Acts of Baptism, Marriage, and Burials of the said Episcopal Congregation of the Church of England at Dunham, in said district, the said register deposited in the office of the Prothonotary of the Superior Court, given at Sweetburg, the 28th of December, 1880, L.S. C. Boucher, Deputy Prothonotary, Superior Court. To A. J. Howard, Esquire, County Clerk of Chittenden County, Vermont. Please search in your office for records of births and deaths of children to the following persons: William Arthur, Malvina Arthur, from January 1st, 1822, to January 1st, 1841, and certify results for A. P. Hinman, attorney, etc., No. 8 Wall Street, New York City, New York, dated January 28th, 1881. State of Vermont, Chittenden County. A. J. Howard, clerk of said Chittenden County, hereby certifies that there are no records of birth, marriages, and deaths required to be kept by county clerks in this state, and that there are no such records in my office. In testimony whereof I have hereunto set my hand and affixed the seal of said county at Burlington, this first day of February, A.D. 1881, A. J. Howard, clerk. St. Armand, February 2nd, 1881. Mr. A. P. Hinman, Sir. Your letter of the 25th January, addressed to Rector of the Baptist Church, St. Armand, Missisquoi County, Province of Quebec, was given to me as the individual indicated. In answer to your request, I reply that no pastor of the Baptist Church in St. Armand, previous to 1843, was legally qualified to keep and use registers for recording marriages, births, baptisms, and deaths. Hence there can be no records of births, etc., of the family of Rev. William Arthur in keeping by this church. Baptist churches always keep a book of records of the doings of the church, in which the names of her own pastors appear, and usually also incidentally the names of pastors of adjacent churches. I have searched the records of the Baptist Church in St. Armand from 1823 to 1843, and the name of the Reverend William Arthur cannot be found therein. I have also searched the records of the Second Baptist Church in Richford, Vermont. In these I find his name appearing, as shown in the following extracts. April 26, 1828. The church received a request from Waterville Church to send brethren to set in council to examine Brother William Arthur for ordination, and the church appointed Brethren A. Stone, Jeremiah James, A. C. Bannister. January 17th, 1829. Voted to employ Elder William Arthur 1/8 part of the time for 1 year. These extracts will show his whereabouts at that time. I have also called upon Deacon Mitchell Stone of Brickshire, Vermont, a cousin of Mrs. Malvina Arthur. He informs that he lived near Malvina Stone, subsequently Mrs. Arthur, during the first 14 years of her life, and that he visited her when a mother in the township of Fairfield, Vermont. Mr. Stone is in his 81st year and cannot remember the date of this visit. These are the facts bearing upon this subject that I am now able to give, and it is facts, I am aware, not speculations, that you desire. As I live on the border, Richford, Vermont, is my nearest post office. Yours truly, Arnold L. Arms, Richford, Franklin County, Vermont. To the Town Clerk of Waterville, Lamoille County, Vermont. Please search in your office for records of births and deaths of the children to the following persons: William Arthur, Malvina Arthur, from January 1st, 1822, to January 1st, 1841, and certify results for A. P. Hinman, attorney, No. 8 Wall Street, New York City, dated New York, January 7th, 1881, New York. Waterville, February 2nd, 1881. I do not find any record of any of the above family. E. S. Shattuck, Town Clerk. North Enosborough, January 4th, 1881. Hon. A. P. Hinman, Dear Sir, I received yours of December 27th. In reply, I will say that I cannot tell the number of children William Arthur had at the time he resided in Waterville, but I think he had 2 or 3 at the time he came to Fairfield. I was acquainted with him in Waterville, and helped move him to Fairfield. Leonard W. Leach. P.S. I received your note after some delay as it went to the wrong office. Leonard W. Leach. St. Albans, Vermont, May 19, 1882. A. P. Hinman. Sir, my sister, Mrs. Harmon Northrop, Jr., has placed in my hands a letter from you which may have been intended for her or my mother, with a request that I answer. My father, Harmon Northrop, aged 86, and my mother, aged 83, were both acquainted with elder William Arthur, but not with any of the family. Nearly a year ago, in conversation with Leonard W. Leach of North Enosborough, I found that he knew more of the elder than any one I have met, and I will give you a few notes or extracts taken at that time. Mr. Leach went to Waterville, Vermont, in May, 1828, and brought Mrs. Arthur, her baby boy, and 3 girls in his wagon, and John Sherman, father of E. W. Sherman of Montgomery, took his team and brought the elder and the household effects. William Arthur came first to St. John's, P.Q., then to Dunham, then to Williston, Vermont, then to Essex, Vermont, studied law and practiced some, then to Waterville, Vermont, where he was ordained, then to Fairfield. While in Fairfield, took a school in Stanbridge, P.Q. Family did not go there. New church in North Fairfield was dedicated in the fall of 1828. Reverend B. H. Wooster, congregant. My grandfather was present and assisted. President Alva Sabin, Baptist, over 90, now living, and at one time M.C., resides West, can get address, was also present, and if you have not written him, you should do so for information. Perhaps the family of Deacon Farnsworth of Fairfax, Vermont, may give you information, also Dr. Sylvester Case of Brandon, Vermont. Should you write Mr. Leach, I think it would be well to put your inquiries in form of direct questions. Also, the impression was current that at the time of your visit to Fairfield that your mission was not friendly to Mr. Arthur, now our president, and perhaps, in order to get these people to investigate closely, they may wish to know that you are pursuing this matter by the wish of the Arthur family. Also, there is a Mrs. Burleson at East Fairfield, Vermont, also the Stone family of Berkshire. The latter are relatives of Mrs. William Arthur. Mrs. H. Northrop, Jr., leaves for the West in a few days. My mother's sight has failed, and I have nothing more. Yours, Joseph Northrop. I always resided in Fairfield until 6 months since. Ezra Wright Sherman, of Montgomery Center, Franklin County, Vermont, a farmer, went to school to William Arthur in Fairfield, Vermont. Says he will be 67 years old in January 1881. Went on one occasion with William Arthur in November 1830 to get a school to teach in Dunham, but was too late. Remembers at that time that William Arthur had 1 and perhaps 2 girls and a boy. He remembered the Able brothers, Luther, Calvin, and Chester Able, and that the boy born in Fairfield, Vermont, was named after one of them, Dr. Chester Able, and was known as Chester Able Arthur. He remembered of Reverend William Arthur saying, in his presence in school one day, to Luther Able, Luther, your hide or mine will soon have to come to the collar beam. The teacher's, William Arthur, old horse died in 2 weeks after, and Luther said to him, E.W.S., I guess the teacher's hide was collared the beam first. Ezra Wright Sherman also showed me an account book kept, as he said, by his father, in which was an account with William Arthur while he lived in Fairfield, Vermont. It set forth the first item, moving William Arthur to Fairfield in May 1828, and the last item was dated January 1832. The most part was store bills paid by my E.W.S. father for William Arthur's account. I had been informed that E.W.S. had written an article about the Arthur family in the Rutland Herald and Globe newspaper, and asked him if he was the author. He said not, but that Dr. C.L. Case, who was stopping at 280 Fourth Avenue, New York City, was the author, and that his, Dr. Case's, mother was also present when Chester Abel Arthur was born in Fairfield, Vermont. She was 17 years old at that time. Also referred me to Erastus Chandler, above Stanbridge, Mrs. Adams, and Mrs. Stricker. He, EWS, is the cousin of the wife of Ormond Bradley of Fairfield, Vermont, and a lawyer. 284th Avenue, New York, December 27, 1880. A. P. Hinman, Dear Sir: Yours of today is received. I regret that I have not a copy of the article referred to, in regard to the birth and childhood of General Arthur. Being at Saratoga at the time of the nomination, I hastily wrote what I did, and did not think it of importance enough to order any papers containing it. I have but one copy, and that is at my home in Brandon, Vermont. I expect to return next week, and will furnish any information desired, or will copy the article and send it on my arrival home. At the time of General Arthur's birth I was a lad of 10 years of age, my parents living nearest neighbors to General Arthur's family, and my memory is very clear in regard to the circumstances of his birth and of the history of the family during the father's pastorate at Fairfield, Vermont. Dr. Arthur's eldest daughter, Mrs. R. M. Caw, lives at 27 Clinton Avenue, Albany, New York. Since my stay in the city I have had 2 letters from her relating to the reminiscences of our childhood. Respectfully yours, C. L. Case. Dear Sir, the writing on the back side of this was prepared last fall for the paper, but as there were several articles appeared the week before, I never sent it. I will send it with a few explanations. I have seen several of the old neighbors that say he moved from Dunham to Waterville, and from there to Fairfield. I have heard from his own mouth all I know of him. His father was Irish, and his mother Scotch. He was educated in Edinburgh, and studied law, and practiced after he came to Canada. He was dissipated when he first came to Canada, but was reformed and converted, and was at first a Free Will Baptist, but after that he joined the Close Communion Baptists, and remained so long as I knew him. He had 3 daughters, older than Chester, Regina, Jane, and Almeda. The dates of their birth and place of birth I cannot give. Instead of my attending school, I recited to Elder Arthur, as he was called. He maintained the most rigid government in his family. This is correct, as nearly as I can remember. Yours truly, M. H. Bliss. Swanton, October 1st, 1881. Dear Editor, as there has been much written and said lately of the birthplace and parentage of President Arthur, I thought I would write you what I know of the matter. In the winter of the year 1829 I boarded at the house of Rev. William Arthur, and attended school. They lived at the time in a small framed house, and not in a log cabin, as was stated at the time of his nomination in Chicago. Chester Abel was then an infant in the cradle, and I then supposed was named for the family physician, although it is now stated that he was named Chester Allen after a relative of his mother's. His father had moved here a year or 2 previous from Dunham, Canada, where he married a Miss Melvina Stone. I can well remember her as a large, lively, good-natured woman, who was very much esteemed by all her acquaintances. He had 3 daughters older than Chester. He was a hard-shell Baptist in the strictest sense of the word, and was earnest and enthusiastic in preaching its doctrines, especially that of immersion. He and the Rev. Benjamin Wooster, the Congregationalist minister in Fairfield at that time, had long and heated debate in the pulpit. Mr. Arthur preached one sermon 4 hours long, and many disbelievers of the doctrine became so weary and excited that they got up their teams, put whip to their horses, and were never seen there again. But the Reverend cared but little for this, and I am sure that if the President is as rigid in his belief as his father was, he will stick to what he believes to be right, if all the powers in the United States should be hurled against him. Little did I think, as I rocked that cradle, the occupant would some day become the President of the United States. But I probably dreamed as much of it then as he did 1 short year ago, but it is certain that no one can tell what is in store for him. For sure, some unknown hand shapes our destiny. M.H.B. End of section 3. Recording by Kevin Davidson. www.blogordie.com. Section 4. Of How a British Subject Became President of the United States, by Arthur P. Hinman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kevin Davidson. Extracts, Town Records of Fairfield, Vermont, Volume 1. Reverend Anson B. Hand, marriage, September 30th, 1830. Reverend Isaac Hill, marriage, July 4th, 1825. Reverend Isaac Hill, marriage, March 19th, 1834. Reverend S. Nash, rector, Union Church, marriage, June 6th, 1832. Page 184. Reverend Isaac Leonard, marriage, December 20th, 1833. Page 192. Reverend Peter Chase, marriage, February 1834. Also births recorded and school meetings, etc. William Arthur and 2 others elected at town meeting, superintending committee for schools, March 2nd, 1829 to March 1st, 1830. No other record of the Arthur name. There is a Catholic, Episcopal, and Congregational church now at Fairfield Center, and a Union church at North Fairfield, on the same spot where William Arthur preached. It was then a Baptist church, but that was torn down 12 years ago, and this Union church built in its place. It is within half a mile of where Chester Abel Arthur was born. A.P.H., December 1880. Fairfield, Franklin County, State of Vermont. Salmon Soul says he resides at Fairfield, Franklin County, State of Vermont. I was born in New York State and came here and have resided in the town of Fairfield since I was 1 year old. I am now 85 years old and will be 86 on the 26th day of January, 1881. I knew Reverend William Arthur when he preached in this town, which was from about 1827 or 1828 until about 1831. I remember of hearing at that time of Reverend William Arthur having a boy born who was named after Dr. Chester Abel, a physician practicing in this town. I also knew the doctor, for he cut off my toe in the year 1826, which would cause me to remember him. I don't remember of any other children of the minister spoken of at the time. I don't remember seeing the minister Arthur's wife, although I may have. He, the minister, was about my age. I don't know where he came from when he commenced to preach here, and when he left, I heard he went to the state of New York to preach. Attest, Salmon Soul, E.C. Soul, Justice of the Peace. Town of Sheldon, Franklin County. Calvin Abel says, I am 76 years of age, and reside in the town of Sheldon, Franklin County, and have resided in Franklin County, Vermont, all my life. Chester Abel Arthur, son of William Arthur, was named after my brother, Chester Abel. I know his name, that is, the child's name that was born in the town of Fairfield, was Chester Abel Arthur. William Arthur's wife's father was named Washington Stone. Her name, I think, was Melvina. I always understood that his wife's father resided in Canada. I know of but one child born in the town of Fairfield, Franklin County, and I think he was the firstborn. I don't remember any brothers of Chester Abel Arthur. My brother named him with the permission of his father and mother. He was the family doctor, and had been a doctor for about 14 years in Fairfield Center. I think I have heard that my brother, the doctor, and Reverend William Arthur married cousins. My brother, Chester Abel, married the daughter of Benjamin Stone of East Berkshire in this state, and the Reverend William Arthur married Washington Stone's daughter over the line in Canada. I think Elder Arthur moved from Fairfield before my brother's death. Reverend William Arthur was between 30 and 40 years of age when in Fairfield. I knew him personally while here, and remember seeing him since about 29 years ago, and spoke to him at that time. Attest Calvin Abel, E.C. Soule, Justice of the Peace. Town of Fairfield, State of Vermont. Leonard D. Gear says, I am 69 years old. I was born here and resided in this town nearly all my life, except 3 or 4 years. I remember Reverend William Arthur when he came here. He married his wife in Berkshire, Franklin County, Vermont, against the wishes of his father-in-law, and moved into Canada just over the line. They had 2 children born them in Canada before they came here, 2 or 3 certain, and I think more. There was one boy named Chester Abel Arthur. None by the name of Chester Allen Arthur was born here. Chester Abel was named after Dr. Chester Abel. The wives of William Arthur and of Dr. Abel were either sisters or cousins. The boy, Chester Abel Arthur, was born over 55 years ago, at least. I'm not certain whether a boy was born in Canada or not, but no, Chester Allen Arthur was born here in 1830. He left this place in 1830 and had 4 or 5 children when he left here. Some were attending school here at the time. Mrs. Arthur's name was Stone, a New England or Yankee woman. Attest Leonard D. Gear, E.C. Soule, Justice of the Peace. To Arthur P. Hinman, New York City, New York. I, A.G. Soule, upon oath, depose and say that I am a town clerk for the town of Fairfield in the county of Franklin and state of Vermont, that I have examined and searched the records of births in the town clerk's office in said town of Fairfield, and do not find recorded therein, between the years A.D. 1825 and A.D. 1835, the birth of any child therein named Chester A. Arthur. A.G. Soule, Town Clerk, dated at Fairfield this 31st day of December, 1880. State of Vermont, Franklin County. Subscribed and sworn to at Fairfield in said county this 31st day of December, A.D. 1880, before me, John McQueeney, Justice of the Peace. State of Vermont, Franklin County. Wilbur P. Davis, Clerk of the County Court for the County of Franklin in the State of Vermont, hereby certify that John McQueeney, Esquire, is a Justice of the Peace with and for the county aforesaid, that his commission is dated on the 1st day of December, A.D. 1880, and will expire on the 30th of November, A.D. 1882, and that he is duly qualified by the laws of this state to administer oaths for general purposes, to take depositions and acknowledgments of deeds and other written instruments, and to his official acts and attestations full faith and credit ought to be given. Franklin, L.S., County Court, Vermont, in testimony whereof is my official seal and signature, William P. Davis, Clerk. I had considerable trouble in getting that last certificate. The town clerk refused to give one for a long time, but this letter will inform you better than I can. Fairfield, Vermont, January 3, 1881. A. P. Hinman, Esquire. Dear Sir, the delay in forwarding the enclosed search of town clerk is not attributable to negligence on my part. The town clerk, who is a stalwart Republican, objected to consult the records in an official capacity and certify accordingly, and did not do so until December 31st, although requested to do so on the evening of your departure from Fairfield. Being uncertain whether the town clerk would comply with my request, I delayed until he did so before applying to the county clerk for a certificate which I have just now received. Trusting that the enclosed papers are sufficiently explicit, that you have not been seriously inconvenienced or injured by this unfortunate delay, I await with much curiosity further developments. Very respectfully, W. H. Fairchild, Attorney. Bedford, Q. February 5th, 1881. Mr. A. P. Hinman, Dear Sir, in answer to your inquiry, I will state, to the best of my recollection, William Arthur taught a district school at Stanbridge Mills in 1830 and 31, and a part of 1832, and his family lived here. He married Malvina Stone of Dunham, and her brother, S. W. Stone, was my brother-in-law. The first son died at Burlington, Vermont. Consequently, the present C. A. Arthur was born in Canada. While he taught school, I lived about 2 miles from Stanbridge Mills. I never knew of their living in Fairfield, Vermont, any length of time. Mrs. William Arthur went home often when her children were born. I am very positive C. A. Arthur was born in Canada, Massapequa County. J. H. Corey. Mr. Hinman, the above is J. H. Corey's statement in his own handwriting. Part of it is hardly legible, but I guess you could make it out. Yours, etc., Lyndall Corey, per M.D.C. Mrs. Captain John Chandler's widow went to school to William Arthur at Stanbridge, Upper Mills, Canada, the second time he came there, in 1830, remembers him as a lame man. She remembers his daughter attended school at the same time, and one day had quite a laugh at the names of his children, when his daughter referred to them in a letter written to her mother. The little girl who was writing the letter was Regina Melvina Maria Arthur. A brother was named William Abel Chester Arthur, and all the other children had 4 names each. They lived at Dunham, Canada. There were 5 or 6 children at the time. Mrs. Arthur was the daughter of a Methodist preacher who lived at Meg's Corner, Dunham, Canada, and Mrs. Chandler was their next neighbor. Her daughter, Mrs. Samuel Stanton, also remembers her mother speaking of the queer names of William Arthur's children, and repeated the names above given and one in between. Joseph Eaton attended school in 1830 and 1831, when William Arthur taught school the last time at Stanbridge, Upper Mills, Canada. He now lives in Fairfield, Vermont. Said his cousin Luther Burley of St. Armand, P.Q., attended school there at the same time. The teacher's oldest girl, Regina, attended school part of the time. She told him her mother was living at Meg's Corners, about 7 miles away, with her sisters and brothers. Lyndall Corey of Stanbridge, Canada, P.Q., remembers William Arthur, went to school to him, also that he was married and had a family at Dunham Flats, and when he left there heard of him at Fairfield, Vermont. Heard William Arthur say that while there he delivered the prayer one 4th of July, and Dr. Chester Abel delivered the oration. He, Arthur, said that it took him 3 days to get up the prayer, and that he received $100 for delivering it. Knows that William Arthur had a son born at Dunham Flats before he went to the States. Mr. Corey's business is that of a surveyor. He also remembered William Arthur before he became a Baptist, officiating as an officer in the Episcopal Church at Dunham Flats, when the Reverend Mr. Cotton was rector. He, Corey, had a cousin, Simon Orcutt, who now lives in Ayrsflat, town of Hadley, P.Q., who was married twice, and the first time William Arthur married him in Corey's presence, about 40 years ago. William Arthur was then at Hinesboro Academy, Vermont. He was well acquainted with Stephen Stone, brother of Mrs. William Arthur, who died in Wisconsin, referred to me, to Brom Seeley and Joseph Baker of Dunham Flats, and Leonard and Hall, joint prothenotaries, Sweetsburg, P.Q. He also remembers that William Arthur married Malvina Stone, daughter of Squire George Washington Stone, who lived at Meg's Corners, Dunham Flats, Canada, PQ, and that it was a runaway match, the old squire, who was a Methodist preacher, being opposed to the match, went to school when William Arthur's daughter, Regina, attended school in Stanbridge. She was then about 11 or 12 years old. This was the second time he taught school in Stanbridge after William Arthur left Dunham Flats. He next lived in Sutton, Canada, just over the line. Stanbridge, January 13, 1881. My dear sir, your letter of the 10th instant came to hand last evening. You say that you have written to Orcutt and have received no answer. You call him Simon when his name is Lyman. That probably is the cause of no answer being returned. You speak of a Mr. Thomas of Sutton Flats. I know some people in Sutton by the name of Thomas, but do not know that either of them is your man. The old gentleman, Baker, is the person who informed me that William Arthur sold his dead son for dissection to the physicians at Burlington, as I reported to you at Earl's Hotel. Of course, he knows something about the matter, if he would testify. I know of no way to ferret out anything with regard to the name and age of the boy at Dunham, unless by an old lady residing at Adamsville, who is aunt to the mother of the Arthur whom you are pursuing, and must have been a resident of Dunham at the time of his birth. An old man by the name of Davies, now residing at West Shefford, was residing at Stanbridge at the time that Arthur was a resident of the same place, and must know something about his children. The information you want of Orcutt I can get by way of my son, who is son-in-law to Orcutt. I feel disposed to do all in my power for you and your party, but I am sorry to say that I am unable to make the researches required without assistance, as I am a poor man. The old lady referred to must have been a resident of Dunham at the time of young Arthur's birth, and being a relative she must remember something about him. Please write me at once if you think it is consistent to do so. Anything you write in confidence will be safe. Respectfully, Lyndall Corey. Stanbridge East, PQ, January 20th, 1881. A.P. Hinman, Esquire, Attorney, etc. Dear Sir, your 2 letters of date January 18th, with enclosures of $5 each, received by last night's mail. I have talked with old Mr. Baker in regard to his having told me once that elder Arthur lost a son by death, which circumstance and others connected with it he has fully recollected, with the exception of his name, which had slipped his memory. I am going to-day to see a J.H. Corey, who professes to know somewhat about the matter, and tomorrow I will start for Adamsville to see the aunt, after which I will inform you further. I will make all the researches possible if it is your wish, for which I trust I will receive a fair remuneration. I will endeavor to write you again Saturday, and if you have any new suggestions, please drop me a line on receipt of this. Respectfully yours, Lyndall Corey, per M.D.C. P.S. I have a reliable evidence that elder Arthur was a resident of Stanbridge 50 years ago, by a marriage that he performed at that time. Since writing the above, I have interviewed J.H. Corey, who appears to be positive that your man was born on British soil, and says that you are mistaken in regard to his name being Chester Allen, as he was named Chester Abel after one Abel Adams, then a resident of this vicinity. However, tomorrow I will commence a more extended tour, and with your assistance hope to furnish you with more positive information. Yours, L.C., per M.D.C. The Old Aunt's Testimony. Mr. Corey subsequently saw the aunt of Chester A. Arthur, referred to in this letter, and here is the result of his interview, written by himself. Stanbridge East, PQ, January 24th, 1881. A. P. Hinman, Esquire, Attorney at Law. Dear Sir, since my last letter to you, I have seen the old aunt referred to previously, but did not succeed in getting as much information from her as I wished to. I will give you, as nearly verbatim as possible, the conversation between us. I. Did you know one William Arthur, who once lived at Dunham Flat? She. I knew him well. His wife was a relative of mine. I. Do you know the name of the eldest son? She. I do. His name is Chester Abel Arthur. I think he was named after your first husband, Abel Adams? She. No, he was named after the physician who assisted at his birth. I. Do you know the place of birth? She. Yes, he was born at Fairfield Center, Vermont. I. Did you ever see the records of his birth? She. No. I. Have you any personal knowledge that the place named is his place of birth? She. No, only from report. I. Is the physician Chester Abel living? She. No, he is dead, and also is his wife. I. When William Arthur, the father of C. A. Arthur, left Fairfield, where did he go? She. He went to Burlington to study law, and just before the time for his examination there was a religious revival in the town which caused him to abandon his intended profession and turn preacher. His first preaching was in Burlington. From that place, I think, he returned to Fairfield and then to Stanbridge. This is the substance of the old lady's story, she, however, refusing to sign a certificate of her statement. I also interviewed Captain William Davis and Warren Stone, both of West Shefford, who resided at Stanbridge at the time that William Arthur was at that place. They agreed in saying that Arthur came into the place in the latter part of 1830 and left in the first part of 1832, remaining in the place about 18 months. Both remember seeing 2 daughters of his, but have no recollection of any son. You see that the elder Arthur resided in Canada 50 years ago this year. I would further say that Lyman Orcutt was married 50 years ago this winter by William Arthur, who then resided here. I have found it uphill work so far, as the parties I have consulted are nearly all strongly prejudiced against the Democratic party. In looking over the whole matter, I am strongly of the opinion that the son Chester Abel died in Burlington, as reported to me by old Mr. Baker, which report I will swear to, and that the present Arthur had assumed the name of his dead brother. There is no doubt but that the son who died at Burlington is the one said to be born at Fairfield Center. Very respectfully yours, Lyndall Corley, per M.D.C. Stanbridge, January 31st, 1881. Dear Sir, I wrote you the result of my excursion to Adamsville and West Shefford. The maiden name of the old lady was Stone. Her first husband's name was Abel Adams, and her second husband was the late Reverend Barnabas Hitchcock. She is now a widow the second time. I saw at once, when I commenced my inquiries, that she had been previously warned of what was coming. After managing very cautiously, I succeeded in drawing out from her the statements which I gave you in my last letter. She persists that William Arthur never had but one son. If old Mr. Baker would tell as much as he knows about the boy that died and was dissected at Burlington, it would show the world that the present Arthur is the second son. There's no doubt in my mind that Chester Abel Arthur is the one that was born in Fairfield. Mr. Stanton tells me that he has informed you where he thinks you will find George Stone, the uncle of the Mr. Arthur in question. Stephen W. Stone, another uncle to young Arthur, died in the West. His widow is living at Red Wing in Minnesota. Her maiden name was Cynthia Gray, formerly from Stanbridge. Her late husband, Stephen W. Stone, was in the service of William Arthur as copyist for the space or term of 1 year or more when Arthur was getting up his book called The American Antiquities. Were said Stone alive, he would know all about Arthur's family. I think Stone's widow or daughter, now young lady, must know all about the family. As I said before, they are residing at Red Wing, Minnesota. I have been faithful in your service, and regret that I could not accomplish more than I have done. Have the kindness to write me upon receipt of this, and let me know what is the present situation of affairs. $10 more will just cover my time and expenses. Yours truly, Lyndall Corey. There is a tombstone in the cemetery at North Fairfield, Vermont, which bears the inscription, "Sacred to the memory of Dr. Chester Abel, who died June 2nd, AD 1832, aged 36 years." Lines 3 verses. Georgia Plains, April 30th, 1882. A. P. Hinman, Attorney. Dear Sir, I received your letter of the 27th instant in due time. It is true I have lived in Georgia more than 50 years, or 73 years, but William Arthur never lived in Georgia, but lived in East Fairfield, about 18 miles northeast of Georgia, and east of St. Albans. But I've seen him many times, and heard him preach. He was a Baptist minister, and very smart, and I think that he left here soon after he was ordained and went south. Chester A. Arthur was born in Fairfield in a log house. I will refer you to Reverend Albans Sabin of Sycamore, DeKalb County, Illinois, who was raised in Georgia and lived here more than 74 years, was well acquainted with William Arthur, and helped ordain him, and was with him a good deal. He is now 88 years old, but I think is able to give you a good deal of information about William Arthur and family. Perhaps you will write to postmaster at East Fairfield, and he might direct you to some able person there that could tell you more about the family. Yours truly, Alvin Mears. Georgia, May 24th, 1882. Arthur P. Hinman, Dear Sir, I received a letter from you some time ago saying that you had learned that I lived in Georgia over 50 years. I am in my 71st year, and have lived on the same farm I was brought up on ever since I was born, except being absent at intervals occasionally. I have had the rheumatism this winter, so I neglected answering your wishes concerning the President's father. He never lived in Georgia to my knowledge. I remember him coming here to a protracted meeting when I was in my teens. He preached and sang the Star of Bethlehem very beautifully, the first time I ever heard it. He stayed here several days, and was considered a very smart man by those who heard him preach. I think it was said by some he lived in the town of Fairfield in this county, Franklin. It is a town next east of St. Albans. It corners on to the town of Georgia. It is said by some that the President was born in the town of Fairfield. If these few lines are of any benefit to you, you are welcome to them. Truly yours, Moses Whiteman. Sycamore, DeKalb County, Illinois, May 9th, 1882. Dear Sir, yours of the 4th instant was duly received. I would say that I am not able to give dates definitely, but can state from recollection what I know of Reverend William Arthur. My first acquaintance with him was about the year 1826 or 1827. I do not recollect being one of the council that ordained Mr. Arthur. I met him at the annual meeting of the Fairfield Association. I learned from him that he emigrated from the north of Ireland, and that his ancestors were of Scotch descent, and were Protestants in belief. He was unfortunately afflicted with a fever sore in one of his knees while a boy, that partially crippled him, and so that the lame leg was 2 or 3 inches shorter than the other, so that he walked with that unequal step that all persons do that are thus afflicted. I think he told me that his parents made extra effort to send him to school on account of his lameness. I recollect his remarking to me that the minister in his father's parish paid him special respect as he passed out of the church, because he was a scholarly young man. He said that little mark of distinction had quite an effect upon him, and fired his ambition not a little to excel as a scholar. I do not know, as he ever told me, how far he was advanced in his education, but as he taught a select school, and had advanced scholars under him, it must have been very respectable. He taught writing schools, and was a beautiful and rapid writer, and would take down a speech as if by shorthand. He was of medium size and dark hair, with a keen, penetrating eye. His articulation was distinct, his features apt, their applications easy, and not unfrequently manifesting the keenest wit. His sarcasms, when used, were cutting. His taste was nice and delicate, and would read men's characters accurately by their physiognomy. His conversation was earnest, lively, and always listened to with attention. My impression is that he left his native land soon after the close of his academic studies. The first I knew of Mr. Arthur, he was studying law in Berkshire, in the county of Franklin, state of Vermont. In an awakening on the subject of religion, Mr. Arthur's mind became interested, and, with others, made a public profession of his faith, was baptized, and associated with the Free Will Baptist Church of that place. Not long after his association with the church, the members and the people of the community expressed the opinion that he would have to preach the gospel, and, as it appeared, he felt a necessity laid upon him to do so. Soon he was licensed to improve his gift, as he should be called upon, and as he should have opportunity. This custom is adopted by all Baptist churches, that the people may judge when it is proper to call the licensed to ordination. It seems he had ample opportunity to improve his gift in quite a region around him, but as he became more acquainted with the regular Baptists, he found his views better accorded with them than with Free Will Baptists, and after due consideration he withdrew from them and proposed himself to the Baptist Church in Berkshire. While he was a licensed, he appointed a meeting for a lecture in a schoolhouse in East Berkshire. In that neighborhood lived old Esquire Royce, the father of Judge Stephen Royce, who was judge of the Supreme Court of Vermont for more than 25 years. The old squire was a man of sterling talent, but somewhat addicted to intemperance. At an early hour he went to the schoolhouse to meet the young preacher before the people should all get in, and after a few moments he rose up and approached him and said, "Young man, I thought I would come here early and examine you as to whether you would ever make a preacher." Mr. Arthur saw in a moment that his object was to dash him before he began the meeting. Mr. Arthur, looking him in the eye, replied, "Well, Esquire, I expect to be examined, but I did not expect it at this time or this place, nor before this board. But I will waive all objections, and will answer any interrogatives you please, to put to the best of my ability." The old squire said, "How many islands are there in the Grecian archipelago?" Arthur replied, "Squire Royce, you are a Freemason, are you not?" The squire answered, "Yes, but I do not see what that has to do with the question." Arthur replied, "If you are, you are acquainted with Morgan's masonry, and in that you will find that there are as many islands in the Greek archipelago as there were buttons on Moses' breeches." The old squire stepped up, patting him on the shoulder, and said, "You'll make a preacher, you can preach." The old man went and took a seat, and paid good attention through the meeting. He attended several meetings afterwards, and invited the young preacher to his house, and ever after treated him with entire respect. I thought I would send you this sheet to let you know that I was endeavoring to answer your request, and I am filling out another sheet, and will send it in a day or two. I may as well pay postage on 2 letters as on one double one. You will excuse my writing. I am an old man, and my hand often flies off at a tangent involuntarily. I am in the 89th year of my age. I was born in Georgia, Vermont, October 23rd, 1793. The facts that I state are made from my recollection, as they lie floating on my memory. A. Sabin. End of Section 4. Recording by Kevin Davidson, www.blogordie.com. Section 5 of How a British Subject Became President of the United States, by Arthur P. Hinman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kevin Davidson. This was answering a fool according to his folly. I believe this anecdote to be a true one. Mr. Arthur married Miss Stone of East Berkshire. Her parents and family were all respectable, industrious, independent farming people. I recollect staying one night at the house of old Mrs. Stone. She was a social, intelligent, old Baptist lady. There was an Elderstone that preached at the town of Johnson, Vermont, who became a Millerite, but was a man of talent and good character. He was brother or uncle to Mrs. Arthur, I'm not certain which. Old Mrs. Stone related to me a conversation which she had with the Reverend Benjamin Wooster of Fairfield, Vermont. He was a man that often gave startling expositions of Scripture, but they would all prove to be correct. They were speaking of a certain preacher. The old lady said she knew him to be a true gospel minister. Said Mr. Wooster, "How do you know that?" She replied, "Because he was the means of converting my soul." "Then," said Mr. Wooster, "I knew a man that was converted by a skunk jumping out at him." The old lady thought him in error, but he was correct. A hypocritical preacher may be the means of converting men to the truth. When I first became personally acquainted with Mr. Arthur, he resided in East Fairfield, Vermont. I stayed at his house one stormy night in midwinter. His house was small, and the luxuries of wealth and aristocracy were totally wanting. The church was small and poor, and what little duty did devolve upon them to support the minister was but slightly felt. He expressed to me some of the trials he had when out of bread and out of wood, and himself a cripple. His temper would rise, and he would almost resolve to quit the ministry. Then the cloud would break, and a good meeting with a sympathizing friend would set all right again. I think one or two of his children were born while he lived in this place. Mr. Arthur preached in several places in the north part of Franklin County within a few years, but how many times he moved his family I could not tell. He preached in Sheldon, St. Armand, Waterville, and South Fairfield. I exchanged pulpits with him several times while he lived in Fairfield and I lived in Georgia. We lived about 14 miles apart. He attended a protracted meeting in our place, and made himself very acceptable to all the people of the town. He preached and lectured in different parts of the town, and lectured on the subjects of temperance several times. I recollect one of his sarcastic remarks in relation to drinking farming men. He said, on a rainy day they would be sure to all meet at the village tavern or store, and imbibe freely of blackstrap (new rum and West India molasses), and then talk and laugh convulsively, and stamp their feet and slap their thighs, without a particle of wit or a point of common sense. Then at night one of them would start for home with a jug of whiskey in one hand and a dried codfish by the tail in the other. He would speed through the mud, and, gesticulating with his codfish, would soliloquize at the top of his voice, "These cursed temperance men would have us sign away our liberties, purchased by the precious blood of our forefathers." About the year 1828, in October, the Vermont Baptist State Convention met at Windsor, Vermont. I had been appointed to preach the introductory sermon, and the convention voted to have another sermon in the forenoon of the second day, and designated Brother Arthur to deliver it. He asked to be excused, but they pressed him to it, so he made the attempt and succeeded well, except he made one mistake. He took for his text the passage in the Acts, chapter 27, verse 29. Then, fearing lest we would have fallen upon rocks, they cast 4 anchors out of the stern, and wished for the day. He improved the passage by way of remark, and after an old obsolete method, he spiritualized the 4 anchors as faith, repentance, hope, and love, or obedience, or something like that. I had heard him preach from the same text before, and I felt it my duty to say to him that the method of using the text was not considered legitimate, but as all that he said was good and true, although it did not grow out of the text, I said nothing about it. As soon as he named his text in the convention, I was sorry that I did not suggest what I felt prompted to do. There was in the assembly an old conscientious minister from New Hampshire, Ariel Kendrick, and as soon as Mr. Arthur had closed his discourse, rose up and said he felt bound to correct the error into which the young brother had fallen, that his discourse did not grow out of his text. He felt in duty bound to correct the error on the spot, and that he hoped the young man would take it kindly, as he meant it for his good. No one made a word of remark, and the meeting closed. Governor Aaron Leland of Chester, Vermont, was the president of the convention. After the adjournment he went to General Forbes' house. As I passed by him, sitting by the door, he said to me, "I never will forgive Father Kendrick as long as I live for that cruel attack on that young man. His criticism was correct enough if made in private, but to make it at that time, and he a stranger, was inhuman. All he said was good, although it may not grow out of the text." Mr. Arthur felt it keenly, as it seemed to indicate his superficial theological training. There were perhaps 70 ministers present from all parts of the state, and this was his first introduction to most of them. I presume he never forgot the criticism. About 1830 he removed his family to the town of Williston, Chittenden County, Vermont, and was employed as a preacher by a small Baptist church then recently organized in that place. He also set up a private academy in a building erected by Reverend Peter Chase, a brother of D.D. Ira Chase of Newton, Massachusetts. But as he did not succeed to his mind, he gave up to Mr. Arthur. He taught the school for some time, I could not state how long. By this move Mr. Arthur's pecuniary circumstances were materially improved. His salary from the church was small but promptly paid, and the income from the school enabled him to rent a good house and to live respectably. After being there about a year, he appointed and held a protracted meeting for the church in the academy building, and he requested me to attend and do the preaching. The meeting was to continue 1 week, and I preached twice and 3 times a day for 8 days. Mr. Arthur expressed to me his satisfaction in relation to his then situation. His school was a success, and the community was quite enlightened, and his friends were cultivated and influential. Among them was ex-Governor Martin Chittenden, son of old Governor Thomas Chittenden, the first governor of the state of Vermont. Governor Martin Chittenden expressed a warm and cordial attachment to Mr. Arthur. He, though not a Baptist, attended Mr. Arthur's meetings much of the time, and he attended the week's meetings quite uniformly. As the political views of both harmonized, the governor might have been some moved by policy. I had not a favorable opinion of the governor, but I found him a pleasant, social, agreeable gentleman. Mr. Arthur's children were perhaps from 14 years of age downward to infancy. I observed the older ones, and thought them smart and of bright intellect. After this meeting I sent my 2 oldest children, a son and a daughter, to Mr. Arthur's school for a term or 2, and they say they well remember trundling the now president in a hand-cart on the sidewalk of the street. I would say that at the time of my week's preaching Mr. Arthur said to me, "During the week I have not heard you pronounce a word wrongly, nor make a wrong choice of words, nor use an improper rhetorical figure, nor any illogical argument." This declaration was quite gratifying to me, as I knew he was a much more critical scholar than myself. Mr. Arthur removed from Williston, Vermont, to some place west of Albany, New York. I occasionally heard from him, but our particular acquaintance terminated on his removal from Williston. The last time I saw him was at the Vermont Baptist Convention held at Fairfax about the year 1850. I did not hear of his death till within a year, and I do not know whether Mrs. Arthur, his wife, is alive or not. I would now say, Mr. Hinman, I send to you this scroll written from my recollection, with no memoranda of any kind, and the statements may not be strictly accurate, but they are about as accurate as I am able to state them. You are at liberty to make what use of them you please. I have no vanity to be gratified, or will to dictate. I only wish to be remembered as the intimate friend of the Reverend William Arthur, and a well-wisher to his family. Alva Sabin, Sycamore, DeKalb County, Illinois. To A. P. Hinman, Esquire, 8 Wall Street, New York City. 610 ACP 1881 LB 29 71. Headquarters of the Army, Adjutant General's Office, Washington, January 27, 1881. Mr. A. P. Hinman, Attorney, etc., No. 8 Wall Street, New York City. Sir: In answer to your communication of the 25th instant, the following information is furnished from the files of this office. Major William Arthur, Paymaster, United States Army, was born at Hinesboro, Chittenden County, Vermont. His date of birth is not shown by the records. His address is Helena, Montana Territory. I am, very respectfully, your obedient servant, George D. Ruggles, Assistant Adjutant General. Headquarters, Military Division of the Atlantic, Governor's Island, New York, January 27, 1881. Arthur P. Hinman, Esquire, No. 8 Wall Street, New York. Sir: In response to your inquiry the 21st instant, the official record of the services of Major William Arthur, Paymaster, United States Army, is as follows: Born, Vermont. Appointed from New York. First Lieutenant, 4th New York Artillery, January 29, 1862. Captain, January 1, 1863. Major, December 25, 1863. Major, Volunteers Brevet, February 20, 1865. Lieutenant Colonel, Volunteers Brevet, March 15, 1865. For gallant conduct in the battles of Spotsylvania and Ream Station, Virginia. Mustered out, April 6, 1865. Captain, Veteran Reserve Corps, January 19, 1865. Accepted, April 29, 1865. Mustered out, February 22, 1866. Paid to March 31, 1866. Second Lieutenant, 3rd Artillery, February 23, 1866. Accepted, April 18, 1866. First Lieutenant, July 28, 1866. Captain Brevet, March 2, 1867. For gallant and meritorious service in the Battle of Spotsylvania, Virginia. Brevet, March 2, 1867. For gallant and meritorious service in the Battle of Ream Station, Virginia. Regimental Quartermaster, 3rd Artillery, February 1, 1873 to July 28, 1875. Major and Paymaster, July 26, 1875. Accepted, July 28, 1875. Vacated commission of First Lieutenant and 2nd Artillery, July 28, 1875. Very respectfully, your obedient servant, James B. Fry, Colonel and Assistant Adjutant General. Hinesburg, Vermont, January 22, 1881. Mr. A. P. Hinman. Respected Sir: Your letter of inquiry respecting Reverend William Arthur was received by my husband, Milton G. Bostwick, the 18th of this month, and he, having no distinct recollections on the subject, wishes me to answer. We have taken some pains to obtain information and look up church records, and the first mention of Elder Arthur having preached in this town, which we have been able to find, is January the 13th, 1833, and the last August 10th, 1834. We also find mention made of his preaching a part of the time, think every alternate Sabbath, between those dates, but he did not move his family to this town until the summer or fall of 1833. I will also state that I attended school in the Williston Academy, a town adjoining this, the last half of the winter term of 1833, closing, I think, in March, 1833. Reverend William Arthur was at that time the principal of that school, and his family resided near the academy. And I frequently called there, and have a distinct recollection of his children, of whom there were 6, 5 girls and 1 boy. Their names, commencing with the oldest, were as follows: Regina, Jane since deceased, Almeda, Anne, Eliza, Chester, Malvina, ranging in age from 1 year old or under to 10 or possibly 11 years old. I taught school in the village of Williston in the spring and summer of 1834, and Elder Arthur preached alternately in Williston and Heinsberg, his family living in Heinsberg. From the information we have been able to obtain, we think he left Heinsberg in the early fall of 1834. Mr. Bostwick has just seen a communication recently received by Mr. Herman A. Post of this town from Chester A. Arthur, Vice President-elect, in which he mentions the time and place and circumstances of his birth, which are the same as have been published in the papers of the day. Yours respectfully, Mrs. M. G. Bostwick, Milton G. Bostwick, Heinsberg, Chittenden County, Vermont. State of Vermont, Office of Secretary of State, Montpelier, January 28, 1881. A. P. Hinman, Esquire. Dear Sir, there is no record in the office showing the births and deaths of the children of William Arthur and Melvina Arthur from January 1st, 1822 to January 1st, 1841. Yours truly, C. W. Porter, Deputy Secretary, L.S. Union College, Schenectady, New York, February 2nd, 1881. A. P. Hinman, Esquire, 8 Wall Street, New York. Dear Sir, in answer to yours, January 22nd, Chester A. Arthur, son of Reverend William Arthur of this city, entered U.C. September 5th, 1845, in the sophomore class, and graduated in July, 1848. He was one of the best scholars of a large class numbering 98 students. At the time he entered, we kept no record of birthplaces. His age was 16 years. Yours, etc., J. Pearson, Treasurer, U.C. The following is an answer to a letter of enquiry as to the earliest age a student could be admitted in the college. Union College, December 3rd, 1881. 16 years of age in any class. J. Pearson, Treasurer, U.C. In a catalogue issued in 1847 by Riggs, Printer, of Schenectady, we find Union College, Junior Class, Third Term, 1847, Chester A. Arthur, Schenectady, Menzo Diefendorf, Fort Plains, Erastus Corning, Jr., Albany, Edward F. Ross, New York, Samuel T. Ross, New York. It also appears therefrom that Chester A. Arthur was in the senior class, first term, in 1847. In a catalogue of officers, graduates, and students of Union College from 1795 to 1868, issued by the Munsell Printer of Albany in 1868, there appears under the year 1848 the following: 1848, Chester A. Arthur, lawyer, Schenectady, New York. In this same catalogue, under a general index of names arranged alphabetically, appears the following under the heading of Arthur: 1845, William Arthur. 1848, Chester A. Arthur. 1864, George Arthur. Mention is made under list of 1845 of William Arthur as follows: William, A.M., clergyman, Schenectady, Newtonville. George was a lawyer in Springfield, Ohio. From the books, registers, etc., of Union College. Date of admission, September 5th, 1845. Residence, Schenectady. Condition, entrance, full. Age, 16. His father was William Arthur, a Baptist clergyman, who died at Newtonville, Albany County, New York, October 28, 1875, aged 79 years. There is no record of births in Union College prior to 1853. After that date, births, etc., are given. The register here says that the college did not make that requirement prior to 1853. To the Supreme Court of the State of New York. We certify that Chester A. Arthur has been a student in the office of the undersigned, who are attorneys and counselors of the Supreme Court of the State of New York, for more than a year last past, and that he is a gentleman of good moral character. Culver and Parker, attorneys and counselors, 289 Broadway, New York. Dated New York, May 1st, 1854. City and County of New York. Chester A. Arthur, being duly sworn, says he is a native-born citizen of the United States, that he is of the age of 21 years, and a resident of the First Judicial District of the Supreme Court of the State of New York. Chester A. Arthur. Sworn to before me this 4th day of May, 1854. William A. Dusenberry, C.O.M. of Deeds. Indorsed, filed May 8th, 1854. State of New York, City and County of New York. I, William A. Butler, Clerk of the said City and County, and Clerk of the Supreme Court of said State, for said County, do certify that I have compared the proceedings with the original certificate of Culver and Parker, attorneys and counselors, etc., dated May 1st, 1854, and affidavit of Chester A. Arthur, verified May 4th, 1854. In the matter of the application of Chester Allen Arthur to be admitted as an attorney of this court, on file in my office, and that the same are correct transcripts therefrom, and of the whole of such original. In witness whereof, I have hereunto subscribed my name, and affixed my official seal this 13th day of January, 1881. L.S. William A. Butler, Clerk. Albany, New York, January 18th, 1881. Arthur P. Hinman, Esquire, 8 Wall Street, New York. Dear Sir, your letter to the rector of the Baptist Church, Newtonville, has been handed to me. There has been no Baptist Church organization at Newtonville since about 1874. Rev. William Arthur died at Newtonville October 27th or 28th, 1875, and was buried 30th October, 1875, in the family lot, Albany Cemetery, between Albany City and West Troy. Dr. Arthur was settled as pastor of the Calvary, State Street, Baptist Church, Albany, from 1855 to 1863, and preached in the N.V. Church until it was closed, although not a regular settled pastor. You will find an obituary notice of Dr. Arthur in the New York Times of October 27th, 28th, 29th, or 30th, 1875, containing a sketch of his life. Respectfully yours, John E. McElroy. From the New York Times, Saturday, October 30th, 1875. Rev. Dr. William Arthur. Rev. Dr. William Arthur, the notice of whose death appeared in the Journal of yesterday, was born in the county of Antrim, Ireland, in the year 1796. He sprang from that Scotch-Irish stock which is excelled by none other in all those qualities which go to make strong, true, independent men. After a thorough preliminary training, he entered Belfast College, and was graduated from the institution at the early age of 18. Not long after, he determined to make the New World his home, and accordingly sailed from Liverpool for New York. Proceeding from the metropolis to Bennington, Vermont, he began his labors in this country as principal of the Bennington Academy. While maintaining this connection, he commenced the study of law, which he subsequently continued in the office of Governor Van Ness of Vermont. His future, however, was determined to run along a different path, and he had not been long at the law before he became convinced, first in his heart and then in his mind, that he was called to the ministry. He at once prepared himself with characteristic energy and assiduity for the sacred calling, and in due course of time was installed as minister of a Baptist church at Bennington. He was subsequently settled in Hinesburg, Fairfield, and Williston, in Vermont, and in 1835 removed to western New York. After laboring a while at York, Livingston County, and Perry, Wyoming County, he accepted a call for the Baptist Church at Greenwich, Washington County, and in that field remained 5 years. Later he removed to Schenectady, and before settling down permanently at Newtonville, had charges successively at Schenectady, Lansingburgh, Hoosick, and West Troy. From 1855 to 1863, Dr. Arthur was pastor of the Calvary Baptist Church of Albany. He will long be remembered by those to whom he then ministered, for the earnestness and power with which he delivered his sacred message. Dr. Arthur leaves 5 daughters and 2 sons. Of the sons, General Chester A. Arthur is the present collector of the port of New York, and the other, who made a gallant record in the late war, is now paymaster in the army with the rank of major. While living at Schenectady, he began publication of the Antiquarian, a magazine whose aim and scope is indicated in its title. Contributing to its pages much curious learning upon a great variety of topics, he soon became known for his rare attainments in the ancient classics, and all departments of history, both sacred and profane. A few years later, his quaint work on family names appeared, and served to confirm the literary reputation which he had previously acquired. Not only in this country, but in Europe, it met with a most favorable reception. It is one of the curiosities of our American literature, and as such has a secure place in the library of all those who have pursued its odd and entertaining pages. During the last 10 years of his life he preached only occasionally, devoting the major part of his time to literary pursuits. He possessed a large and valuable library containing many rare volumes, and in reading and composition his time passed away. Some years ago the degree of Doctor of Divinity was conferred upon him by one of our universities. He also received the degree of A.M. from Union College. We have thus touched upon the salient points in the life of the deceased. Those who knew him best and will remember him longest will bear witness to the rugged strength and sturdy independence of his character. His scorn of conventionality and of the fashion which passes away was more than overbalanced by his unswerving devotion to whatever things are true and noble and generous. A radical in all essential opinions, he was not easily shaken from a position which he once took. The Baptist denomination, it is safe to say, never had a more uncompromising champion of their creed, never one who could present the reasons for the faith that was in him, and them with more readiness, force, and clearness. He never wavered from his old allegiance, and remained loyal and faithful to the end. Peace to his ashes. Albany Evening Journal. Below find contents of William Arthur's lot in the Albany Rural Cemetery, being 1/3 of Lot 8, Section 24. Albany, New York, February 20th, 1881. Brother Arthur. Yours of the 17th came duly to hand. Below find the list of cadavers as per request. Elizabeth H. Herndon, wife of William Lewis Herndon, U.S.N., born October 10th, 1817, at Culpeper, Virginia, died Hyères, France, April 27th, 1878. William Lewis Herndon Arthur, died July 8th, 1863, aged 2 years 7 months. William G. Caw, born September 3rd, 1806, died in Cohoes, August 1st, 1864. Reverend William Arthur, D.D., born in County Antrim, Ireland, 1796, died at Newtonville, Albany County, October 27th, 1875, aged 79 years. Malvina Stone, wife of Reverend William Arthur, born at Berkshire, Vermont, April 29th, 1802, died at Newtonville, January 16th, 1869. Her children rise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praiseth her. There is also on the lot 15 shrubs, 2 dead bushes, 2 willows, 1 large maple, and plenty of snow, and 1 grave with no headstone. I would take it to be the grave of a grown person. Dave and I visited your lot and found everything in order. Respectfully, Archibald Erzberger. New York, December 14, 1880. Arthur P. Hinman, Esquire. Dear Sir: In response to yours of yesterday, I have to say that a recent investigation of Arthur material in the direction which your letter indicates convinces me more than ever that our friend Dwight was right in his statements. I was with William Arthur when he was wounded, and of course am in possession of the information which you seek. The colonel of the regiment is now at one of our hotels, and through him I learn that through 2 terms of William Arthur's enlistment he figured on the muster rolls as being born in 2 places. Dwight is right in his statements. This has been my belief for some time. If I can assist in any way, please make an appointment. Yours truly, J. N. Beach. A Russian attack. President Arthur's message severely criticized by St. Petersburg Journal. Exception taken to the condition of the Jews in Russia. By cable to the Herald. London, December 12, 1881. Our St. Petersburg correspondent telegraphs under the date of the 9th, today's Novaya Vremya contains the following article, which I translate literally without softening or accentuating the opprobrious language of the article. Arthur's message to Congress is surprisingly strange, if the telegraphic version before us be accurate. It congratulates Americans on their growing prosperity, as if this was anything new to the honorable Yankees. Arthur takes upon himself to express his views on foreign politics. France and Germany receive friendly patronage, but with regard to the much talked of friendship with England not a word is said, and how could it be expected from an Irishman? Arthur even refrains from making comments on English home affairs. The Irish rebellion, for example, which is agitating millions of American citizens who are also born Irishmen, like the President. But Arthur was more brave in dealing with Russia, laying aside the fundamental principles of American foreign policy of non-intervention in the internal affairs of European governments. Arthur took it into his head to promise us his energetic protestations with regard to our treatment of the Jews. Arthur's threats are empty ones. No notice will be taken of any of his representations by the Russian government, not even out of condescension to the American people, among whom are so many Jewish swindlers, unaccustomed to productive labor, and who thrive on American soil, as elsewhere, by getting the fruits of other people's work. This thoughtless freak of Arthur places the American government in a sorry light. Constitution of the United States, Article 2, Subdivision 5. No person, except a natural-born citizen or citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of this Constitution, shall be eligible to the office of President. Neither shall any person be eligible to that office who shall not have attained the age of 35 years and been 14 years a resident within the United States. Constitutional Amendment, Article 12, Subdivision 3. But no person constitutionally ineligible to the office of President shall be eligible to that of Vice President of the United States. New York, January 7, 1881. Hon. Thomas F. Bayard, U.S. Senator. Dear Sir: What is the construction of Article 2, Section 1, Clause 5 of the Constitution of the United States, that no person, except a natural-born citizen, etc., shall be eligible, etc. ... Yours respectfully, A. P. Hinman. Senate of the United States, City of Washington, January 10, 1881. A. P. Hinman, Esquire, New York. Dear Sir: In response to your letter of the 7th instant, the term natural-born citizen, as used in the Constitution and statutes of the U.S., is held to be a native of the U.S. The naturalization by law of a father before his child attains the age of 21 would be naturalization of such minor. Yours respectfully, T. F. Bayard. Copied from Harper's Weekly, August 12, 1871. The Death Struggle. My back is to the wall, and my face is to my foes, that surge and gather round me like waves when winter blows, the ghosts of bygone errors, the faults of former years that sting my veins like arrows and pierce my heart like spears. But let them do their utmost, for these I can endure, and meet and overcome them by suffering made pure. Against all other foemen I'll fight with fiery breath, and if, all done, I am vanquished, so gloriously to death. My back is to the wall, and my face is to my foes. I've lived a life of combat and borne what no one knows. But in this mortal struggle I stand, poor speck of dust, defiant, self-reliant, to die, if die I must. A. P. Hinman. End of section 5. Recording by Kevin Davidson. www.blogordie.com. End of How a British Subject Became President of the United States by Arthur P. Hinman.